I'm Tom Davies, and this is Collecting Stories, American Art. We are so fortunate to live in a part of the country with 4 distinct seasons. These seasonal changes provide artists with constant choices as they interpret the landscape around them. Aldro Hibbard was the consummate painter of New England's winters, as seen in this view of Jeffersonville, Vermont, painted in the early 1930s. We'll examine each of the 4 seasons and how 16 different artists painted them. You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off of you. Courtesy, Frankie Valli. Few things have more influence on an artist's choice of palette than the season of the scene they're trying to capture. Witness the frequency a specific season is an integral part of a painting's title. Spring on the so-and-so, winter here or there. Many artists have almost made a science out of mastering the look of each season by executing 4 paintings of the same scene, but in each of the seasons. How many of you have lived where it's always hot, then a little break, always foggy, then a little sun, never rains until 3 months of monsoon, or have a 3-month mud season? Live with any of these and you'll appreciate the 4 seasons. After all, they say, you're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off of you. Artists love each of the seasons. Writers, poets, and playwrights extol the virtues of each season. Of summer, if there's a problem with summer, it's too short. Summertime and the living is easy. A perfect summer day is when the sun is shining, the breeze is blowing, and the lawnmower is broken. The full flush of summer is symbolized here by the enormous tree dominating the figures like a giant umbrella. Also reflected by the young 22-year-old artist Edward Gay, the rural landscape begrudgingly giving way to man encroaching on what was once nature's domain. Edward Gay bridged the Hudson River style, as seen in this piece, into the transitional tonalist style, thus enjoying a long and successful career. A bright sunny day, clear aqua blue water, and a panoramic view of a picturesque harbor, all signs of summer. This is an image of the entry into Rockport Harbor, painted from a distance in an area known as the Headlands. To the right of center, the motif number 1 is represented in shadow, not easily seen. Interestingly, the artist, Garrett Benneker, was primarily a Provincetown painter on Cape Cod, but reflects that artists in these 2 communities often painted in each other's backyards, so to speak. This piece demonstrates his mature and wonderful handling of Impressionism, with total freedom and none of the pressure and demands of illustration. Benneker pursued a very different passion than most of his peers. He was a champion of the working man and painted over 400 illustrations featuring workers, often within factories. He did over 150 magazine covers and became known as the foremost painter of industrial art in the 1920s and early 30s. He also painted several war bond posters during World War I. The image of Benneker at his easel shows him painting the figure that was used in this war bond poster. The third summer piece is a brilliantly lit image of Star Island in Rockport, Massachusetts, looking past Sandy Bay Yacht Club with the iconic motif in the distance. The artist is almost as iconic, at least for Cape Ann art, Emile Gruppe. Technically, This small piece of land is not an island now. It is, in fact, attached to the shoreline. There was, however, a narrow separation from the shore until a hurricane in the 1930s destroyed the fishing shacks seen here, and the town simply filled in the space. This scene would be before the hurricane, placing it in the late 20s or early 30s. Artists and even critics love to talk about the light and special qualities. It's no different here. The devoted artists swear the light on Cape Ann is different. Well, it does look different in this painting. Sailing is an addictive summertime pastime for many people living along the coastline. The activity around the harbors where these people dock their boats, clean, polish, and obsess over them is almost as much a form of rest and relaxation as the act of sailing itself. Here, the artist, Otis Cook, captures that sense of activity and preparation for a day's sailing. Cook was a Cape Ann artist with home and studio in Rockport on Bearskin Neck, overlooking the Sandy Bay Yacht Club. Otis Cook was a highly competent and unassuming artist. If the early landscape painters of the Hudson River School loved this season above the others, it had to be autumn for its obvious reason, color. As long as autumn lasts, I shall not have hands, canvas, or color enough to paint the beautiful things I see. On a somewhat less literary level, comparing autumn, no spring nor summer's beauty has such grace as the fake fire in my fireplace. It is clearly fortuitous. Most of these artists resided in and painted in the Northeast, and the most brilliant autumn change of colors occurred in these forests. This scene boldly captures what these artists love about autumn. The artist is William Mason Brown, one of the early artists and followers of Thomas Cole, generally considered the father of the group. Brown was born in Troy, New York in 1828 and has the unique distinction of being one of only two prominent artists of the day that excelled in both landscape and still life painting. Brown's paintings from 1850 to 1869 were firmly in the Hudson River tradition, like this piece. Then abruptly, in 1870, he switched completely to still life paintings for the remaining 29 years of his life. William Mason Brown excelled in both genres. James Hope was born in Scotland, emigrated to America, but soon lost both his parents. He moved several times between Vermont and Canada, wherever he could sustain a living as a portrait and landscape painter. Around the mid-1850s, he settled in New York City and achieved reasonable success until he became one of a number of artists caught up in the Civil War. When I first saw this, I thought it was a magical touch to put a single figure at the far end of the stream, fishing. Look closely. The red shirt helps you spot him. This autumn scene is in the Green Mountains of Vermont and was painted in 1866, presumably shortly after his service in the Union Army. This image is Captain James Hope during the Battle of Antietam as part of a regiment from Vermont. He participated in 11 campaigns, experiencing some of the bloodiest battles of the war. Later, he achieved notoriety as a painter of Civil War engagements. In the mid-70s, Hope moved to Watkins Glen and produced a series of almost otherworldly paintings of the region's rock formations. This autumn Green Mountain landscape is so sensitively painted, it would leave the viewer believing life is idyllic. James Hope knew firsthand it isn't. In pursuit of his career, the Hartford resident Charles de Wolfe Brownell had to make a painful and difficult decision. His profession, the law, was too corrupt, so he decided to paint and travel. It is possible that Charles de Wolfe Brownell traveled to more places, longer distances, and more times than any other American artist ever. Beginning in the early 1850s, he traveled and painted in Cuba, the first American to do so, throughout the Caribbean, all of South America, virtually every country in Europe, and during later years to the Mid and the Far East. Brownell did not keep a written diary of his travels. Instead, he kept a painted diary of his adventures. He painted magnificently detailed works on paper, in oil, and 3 by 5 inches in size. These were slipped into paper mounts, something like early photo albums. They were generally inscribed on the reverse, detailing place, time, and any other messages he chose. Given how little time he spent in America, this is a fairly rare scene, painted in 1865 and inscribed Old Lime Pumpkins. Brownell's most important work was an historically significant image of the Charter Oak. A massive 1,000-year-old oak tree was the hiding place for the royal charter granted to Connecticut by the English crown in 1662, giving the state certain rights. A change in the monarchy resulted in a demand for its return. The colonists refused and hid it in this tree. It became a symbol of rebellion for the state. The most famous tree finally fell during a violent storm in 1856. Homer Dodge Martin was born in Albany in 1836, and by 1860 was residing in New York City. His journey was complex and plagued by ill health, producing what biographical material of the day called melancholy, probably bouts of depression. This last look at autumn demonstrates a more restrained use of color, and yet still communicates the arrival of the season. His early works, of which this is one, painted in 1863, were squarely in the Hudson River School tradition, if not occasionally somewhat somber. This landscape in early autumn was painted when Martin was just 27 years old. He was constantly troubled by what he felt was a lack of formal training. He visited Europe twice, in 1876 and again in 1881. At that time, he became influenced by the French Barbizon artists. His gradual move in this direction of smaller, more intimate in scale, and usually darker work was in conflict with his earlier style. This lost him much of his client base. Sadly, his eyesight began to fail him. Today's scholars attribute Martin's later works as a conscious move towards Impressionism. This is his acknowledged masterpiece, entitled Harp of the Winds, painted in 1895, shortly before his passing, and is a memory picture of the Seine River in France. It is now in the Metropolitan Museum. This and other late works reflect certain brushwork characteristics of the Impressionists, if not their color. The key question is, at the time he painted this picture, Homer Dodge Martin was legally blind. How much did this have to do with it? An open question. Winter is the season of subtlety for artists. Less color, and often shapes are rounded and softened. Writers call it a stark beauty, nature stripped down to its bare bones. It's still life painting in white and gray. The great poet and limerick writer, Ogden Nash, always saw the world just a little differently. Winter is the king of showmen, turning fire hydrants into snowmen. Smooth and clean and frosty white, the world looks good enough to bite. Snow is snowy when it's snowing. Sorry, it's slushy when it's going. The artist, Walter Palmer, was born in Albany in an artist-supportive family. His father was Erastus Dow Palmer, a nationally recognized sculptor, and his home, while growing up, was frequently visited by major artists of the day. He studied in Europe in the mid-1870s and was among the first artists to travel and paint in Japan in 1880. Palmer ultimately settled back in Albany for the rest of his career and virtually redefined how to paint snow. He believed in and explored injecting colors, blues, pinks, and yellows into his snowscapes. He evolved a unique use of mixed media. Transparent watercolor, gouache, pastel, and even on occasion crayon can be found in his work. His finished works can almost appear like fantasy of sparkle, reflected light, and color. I've heard restorers say they resist cleaning and restoring the surfaces of these paintings, particularly because they really don't know what they may accidentally remove. Many great artists unintentionally create followers or a school that emulates their style. Nobody follows or emulates Walter Palmer. It's too complex. The bio written about the artist Aldro Hibbard was entitled Artists in Two Worlds. What were they? He was quoted in an interview. A is for art, and B is for baseball. Here endeth the alphabet. Hibbard maintained a 300-plus batting average in the North Shore baseball leagues. He played the game that he loved and later coached his town team up to his 50s. Aldro Hibbard was a product of two Capes, born on Cape Cod and matured as an artist on Cape Ann. He earned the reputation as the finest snow painter of his day and was the driving force behind and the early president of the Rockport Art Association. Hibbard's ever-present cigar got him in trouble while painting knee-deep in snow in 0-degree temperature when it froze to his lip. A scholarship earned him 2 years studying in Europe, which was terminated late 1914 when the winds of World War I were stirring up, and he was in fact arrested mistakenly and identified as a spy. While in Spain, Hibbard met the legendary Joaquin Sorolla, where the two agreed real painting occurred outdoors. The studio was good for smoking in. Among his many responsibilities around the town of Rockport, he was in charge of mixing the exact shade of red to paint the motif. Aldro Hibbard was a force to be reckoned with. Stories abound about his escapades in New England winters, where he was a dedicated plein air painter. Hibbard's career was long and successful. Numerous catalogs and articles, one of which I wrote, and retrospectives have been written about him. I had the good fortune to meet him several times in his studio. He would greet you, look you straight in the eye, shake hands, and begin to tighten his grip, just to see who would back down first. Whatever the outcome, he would break down in laughter. Without failure, his conversations would quickly shift away from art to baseball. Some of my fondest memories are times with Aldro Hibbard. Look closely at this scene in Jeffersonville, Vermont. It demonstrates one of Hibbard's admonitions to his students. Don't paint snow white. It is full of subtle colors. Find them. Not to forget, it snows out west. This small but very personal winter scene is inscribed on the reverse. Yosemite, Christmas, 1923. Painted by Swedish-born Gunnar Widfors, it only hints at the masterpiece paintings that he did of the country's national parks, especially the Grand Canyon and Yosemite. A chance encounter with the director of the national parks changed the artist's life. Encouraged to paint scenes of the parks, Widfors constructed his studio on the rim of the canyon. A collection of his Grand Canyon paintings resides in the National Gallery of American Art and have been described by its director as the finest things to come out of the West. Sadly, Widfors was diagnosed with a heart condition in 1934 and told to leave the high altitudes and reside in the desert. Before he could depart, on his last day, while viewing his beloved canyon, he suffered a heart attack. He is buried at the South Rim Cemetery by the Shrine of the Ages. The 7,800-foot promenade at the north rim of the Grand Canyon is named Widfors Point in memory of Gunnar Widfors. We are surprised by nature. We can't improve upon nature, but progress as an artist occurs when design takes preference over nature. Nature is beautiful, but creativity comes from the artist and the choices he makes while creating a painting. It is nature interpreted, not copied, and it tells us as much about the artist as it does about the natural world around us. These are the words and thoughts of Tom Nicholas, and could not be better demonstrated than in this extraordinary winter watercolor entitled View of the Island. There's no question the island does exist. The house is on the island, and the foreground marsh exists in some form. The rest, the part that makes this a great painting, is the artist's design. It is not a copy of nature. Tom has perfected the use of hard and soft edges to delineate some passages and leave others less defined and mysterious. With a remarkably restricted palette, he nevertheless creates a great drama in light and dark shadow patterns. During the late 1970s, this piece was exhibited at the Cordova and the Cahoon Museums and shows at the Allied Artists, Grand Central Gallery, and the Salmagundi Club. Spring for artists is the color green. Spring for writers is rebirth, flowers, love in the air, and transition from winter to summer. To get to summer, you have to go through spring. Spring is the time of year when it is summer in the sun and winter in the shade. Perhaps a lighter look at this wonderful season. Spring is nature's way of saying, let's party. Some artists demonstrate a remarkable ability to develop their art in line with public tastes. Well, that's kind of a nice way of saying willing to change. Carl Hirschberg was born in 1854, and his late 19th century work reflected strongly academic training in genre painting. As public tastes changed, so did he. His adaptation to Impressionism is evident in this color-filled image of spring, entitled Mill at Kent. By 1915, Hirschberg settled into Kent, Connecticut, becoming an early and influential member of the Kent Art Association. The Litchfield Hills area was home to many artists, and Kent, located on the Housatonic River in the northwest part of the state, became the focal point of this active art colony. This vividly painted plein air picture, executed circa 1918, demonstrates a successful transition from one century to the next. Aside from generally avoiding earthquakes, mudslides, floods, tornadoes, wildfires, and the eye of a hurricane, and temperatures above 100 and below zero. We in New England are blessed with four distinct seasons. We're looking at a wonderful spring scene entitled Spring on the Suncook. The artist is Leon Foster Jones, and the picture is on the Suncook River in central New Hampshire, painted in 1909. Jones was a New Hampshire native, born in Manchester, and received extensive training in Boston and Europe. His early career was spent in New England, with frequent exhibits in Boston and several national venues. There is not an extensive biomaterial on him. It's known that he left Boston art scene around 1912 and settled in the quiet and peaceful Port Jefferson, Long Island. He continued to paint and teach. One account has emerged that he was in France at the outbreak of World War I and narrowly escaped with his family back to England and eventually gained passage back to the States. It's always a puzzle to look back on sketchy information about a gifted artist's career and understand why they seemingly stepped out of the limelight. Perhaps a hint lay in a quote of a close friend at the time of Jones' passing. He never owned a car, and if Jonesy couldn't walk to it, he wouldn't paint it. Spring is a time when a dirt road, a mundane plot of ground, and a dried up flower bed suddenly become worthy subjects to paint. It demands brilliant green and blossoming flowers. Nobody captured this better than old Lyme legend Frank Vincent Dumond. During his more than half century as a resident of Old Lyme and beloved instructor at the Art Students League, Dumond's use of spring's green became known as Dumond Green. Among his scores of distinguished pupils were Georgia O'Keeffe, Norman Rockwell, John Marin, and Charles Hawthorne. In addition to the long shadow he cast as a painter and instructor, Frank Vincent Dumond was a dedicated fly fisherman who annually retreated to the Margaree River in Nova Scotia for some of North America's finest salmon and trout fishing, often in the company of his dear friend and important landscape painter, seen with him here, Willard Metcalf. If flowers are the accepted symbol of spring, then it's appropriate to include the work by a totally dedicated artist of the subject. In fact, it's believed he only painted flowers. For several years, there has been a mystery about this French-born artist, Raoul de Longpre, known for his exceptional floral paintings, often in gouache and watercolor. There was another de Longpre named Paul, who was also a floral painter, but in a dissimilar style. It is known Paul departed France in 1890, eventually settling in West Hollywood, California, establishing a world-class garden surrounding his Moorish-inspired home. In fact, there's a street in West Hollywood named after him, which I've actually been on. Their specific relationship was unknown, father-son, cousins, or brothers. It has also never been confirmed that Raoul actually visited America. It's generally accepted now that they were brothers, and Paul, the older, acted as Raoul's agent in this country. Regardless, Raoul's work was highly sought after in America. And as we end looking at the four seasons, interpreted by artists, it's again worth repeating, you're just too good to be true, can't take my eyes off of you. Our next segment, Still Life, the magic of still life paintings. The measure